welcome to the Shipwreck Archives. Ah, here it is, the last life of the Eliza Anderson. Enjoy.
By September 11, 1897, Dutch Harbor, Alaska had given up all hope on ever seeing the steamer, the Eliza Anderson, above water again. She was long overdue by almost a whole week, and the convoy that she had been traveling with had already come and gone. Still, there was no sign of the Eliza Anderson. The ship was not well suited to the rigors of rough waters at the best of times, and a storm that had broken across the convoy the week before had not been a small one. The newspapers had already started to publish the news. The Eliza Anderson was presumed lost with all hands. The jubilation ashore can only be imagined, therefore, when the ship limped into the harbor a few days later with an incredible and harrowing story to tell. The ship was entirely gutted, leaking, and in risk of sinking any moment, but not a single life had been lost, an incredible feat considering the dangers that the ship had faced. The Eliza Anderson of 1897 was a far cry from the ship that arrived in Puget Sound in 1859. The wooden Sidewheeler was a strong and beautiful ship who made up for lack of speed by being reliable and safe, but by 1870 the Eliza Anderson was already considered outdated. At 275 tons, she was too small to make the money that the other new and larger ships were making. She was replaced on her route by the larger Olympia, and she was tied up at the wharf in Seattle. She would periodically see service after 1870 as a spare, but by 1877 she was all but forgotten. The ship slowly became less and less seaworthy without any care or attention, and she eventually sank where she was moored. The Eliza Anderson seemed as though she was destined to break apart slowly at the dock. Water rushed in and out of her, weeds covered her decks, and her keel sank down into the mud of the wharf. On June 25, 1881, the Puget Sound Mail gleefully announced the news that the plans to resurrect the Eliza Anderson were underway. Captain Thomas Wright took ownership of her, and under his care she floated once again. She was not ready to face the seas yet, however, and her complete overhaul and refit meant that she did not see service again until 1883. Not only was she once again seaworthy, but she also found herself in the possession of a new engine scrapped from the steamer Enterprise. Her second life did not last long, however. No matter how much she was rebuilt and refitted, the Eliza Anderson was still an old and outdated ship. Sometime in the early 1890s, the Eliza Anderson found herself once again sitting in a slough in Seattle, waiting for the scrapping yards to claim her. Further refits would not have been worth the effort, and the Eliza Anderson would have been forgotten if it had not been for the Klondike Gold Rush. The allure of gold brought people not only from across the country, but from around the world, sure that they would be the next ones to find the nugget that would change their lives. Many of these miners chose the water route, and this meant that ships were at a premium. It should not be a surprise that the owners of the Eliza Anderson suddenly remembered her and decided to give her yet another life. This time, however, there would be no total refit for the aging steamer. The money in transporting miners was not in the comfort that you could give them, but rather in how many you could cram into a ship. Indeed, the owners of the Eliza Anderson followed this principle religiously. They rented the bunks and cabins 2 or 3 times each for the same voyage, resulting in fights and loud arguments when the passengers were allowed to board and attempted to take their lodging. Many of the men who had thought they had procured bunks found their only accommodation to be the hard deck exposed to the elements. August 10, 1897, a decrepit convoy of aging ships left Seattle, all of them looking more suited for the wrecking yard than a voyage across stormy ocean seas. While all of them had been fine ships in their day, it was more than clear to anyone who looked that that day was long past. Even the coal barge that was supposed to keep the ship stocked with coal was an ancient converted Russian gunboat. The crew was not much better by some accounts. At the height of the rush, experienced sailors were hard to find, and the crews that could be found, especially for ships such as these, were the dregs of the wharf and any miners who decided to work their way to the gold fields. What the crew of the Eliza Anderson lacked in talent as sailors, they made up for in the quantity of liquor they smuggled aboard. By the time they reached British Columbia to top up on coal, they were so roaring drunk that they stowed it improperly. The now unbalanced steamer listed and collided with the clipper ship, flooding the steamer's galley and damaging her starboard paddle box. After this misadventure, the passengers expected that Captain Thomas Powers would order that the ship be repaired before carrying on, but he seemed determined to carry on with the convoy. This stubborn streak showed itself once again in Kodiak, when Captain Powers was warned by locals that there was a storm brewing. Captain Powers was dismissive of the concerns of foul weather, and he would soon come to regret his hubris. Shortly after leaving Kodiak, the storm hit, carrying the Eliza Anderson far away from the other ships of the convoy. It did not take long for the aging ship to be taking on water, forcing the crew and the passengers to all man the pumps in a desperate attempt to keep her afloat. That was only the start, however. The inexperienced and drunken crew had been too lazy to fully load the ship with coal in Kodiak, and now they paid for it dearly. Wallowing in the troughs of waves with her rudder chain broken, losing steam now would be deadly. Worse yet, since they had parted with the convoy, they had also parted from the fuel barge, and so they had no chance of acquiring new fuel, even if they did manage to survive the storm. In their time of desperation, the crew and passengers made peace for the first time in the voyage. Any member of the company who was not occupied with the pumps found himself an axe, and they went about the business of gutting the ship with whatever could be chopped up to fuel her a little while longer. The captain, meanwhile, ordered that 50 barrels of lubricating oil and kerosene be poured overboard in an attempt to calm the waters around the ship. The ancient and twice resurrected Eliza Anderson was not equal to her task, however, and her smokestack crashed to the deck. For 2 days and 2 nights, the people aboard the deteriorating ship fought for their lives. Even the wooden water tanks of the ship were drained and chopped up for fuel, while the cook threw in the last side of bacon from the galley. Anything that could burn was sacrificed. Still, it seemed as though all their efforts were in vain. This was when a miracle happened. While the accounts of the man's origins differ, descriptions of him are all the same. Tall with a long white beard. At least one account said that the man looked as though he was an ancient Viking. Some accounts say that he came in a small sailboat, pulled up alongside, and without a word took the wheel from the captain. Others say that he appeared suddenly out of thin air and began to steer the ship. No matter how the story goes, the result was the same. The ship found itself steered through a seemingly impenetrable maze of breakers to a small harbor of an abandoned cannery on Kodiak Island. The identity of this man with a long white beard was a subject of conversation for a very long time where ships were known. Some said that it was the ghost of Captain Wright who had loved the ship and could not stand to see her wrecked. Others said it was a mysterious man of the wilds who had come to their rescue. The cutter Corwin, an American revenue ship, had a different story. When they had been sent to look for the missing Eliza Anderson, they had found 2 Scandinavian brothers who owned a now-defunct cannery on Kodiak. One of them admitted that he had stowed away on the Eliza Anderson and that he had stayed hidden out of fear of being detained as a stowaway. It was only when he realized the ship was doomed that he had emerged and steered the troubled ship into the harbor near his cannery. No matter who their mysterious rescuer was, the Eliza Anderson was able to hide in the harbor from the storm, which did not abate for a week. In the meantime, they were able to load the hold of the ship with coal from the cannery pit. With the now full fuel supply, the ship limped into Dutch harbor. It was clear to all, however, even the ever-stubborn Captain Powers, that the Eliza Anderson could go no further. He had wanted to carry on through, but the passengers all disembarked, announcing they would go no further on her, and there was no coal available for purchase. The Eliza Anderson was once more left at anchor. There was no more life left in her. Her third life had not been a charmed one. In March of 1898, a large spring storm broke her anchor chain, and she was blown onto the beach, where she was quickly taken apart by the locals for fuel and materials to build shacks. Only her boiler pipe and paddle wheel shafts remained in the 1920s, until they too were covered by the sand, and the Eliza Anderson was finally allowed to rest. For further reading on the story, please see British Columbia Shipwrecks by T. W. Patterson or our list of sources below. Thank you for listening.